Hi there, I'm Ayelet Connell. I'm Paleo gluten-free chef, and I'm paired here with Diane and Dr. Frank, and I'm going to be showing you today how to make a beautiful dinner that's paleo and gluten-free and ketogenic friendly and so on and so forth. So we have here a flank steak, about a pound of flank steak, so depending on how big of a family you're feeding, you can always do more, but I actually marinated it last night, which is a good thing to talk about. Flank steak and skirt steak, there's a lot of striations in it. It's a beautiful steak to marinate, and you can use some really healthy ingredients. So what we're going to do is just take this out and drain some of the juices so that it's ready to go in the oven, and I want to talk a little bit about what I used for the marinade. So I actually did about a quarter cup of coconut aminos. You can also use Bragg's, which is more soy-based, but it's the amino acids, so it's a little less allergenic, but the coconut aminos is a great product. It's very salty, so you don't need to use a lot of extra salt. And then I put a quarter cup of honey in it. You can use maple syrup. Of course, you're not having a quarter cup of that, so it's not making it hugely high in carbs, but it just gives it a little bit of a flavor that gets caramelized when you bake it. And then there's about a tablespoon of whole grain mustard, and then some onion powder, about a teaspoon and a half of onion powder, and that's it. Mix it up with a whisk in a measuring cup, and then you just put it into a bag with the steak, kind of massage it a little bit, and then ideally 4 to 6 hours minimum. You can do a couple hours, it just won't have as much of a robust flavor. So then what you want to do when you're baking it, you take a baking sheet. I like to use parchment paper because most of these baking sheets that are so great in the kitchen are made out of aluminum, so the parchment paper is a nice kind of barrier. But we're still going to use a rack because that way it'll get cooked all the way through. So what we're going to do, this is a pound, as I said. If it's a really big piece of meat, you can definitely slice it so that it's in smaller sections. But we're going to kind of try to drain it off so that there's not a lot of juice. And then we're going to discard this. Follow me to the garbage. Okay. So you can certainly trim some of the fat, but I will say that when it's a grass-fed beef,
no, we'll leave it.
We're going to leave it on. You got it. And it's just so delicious. The fat is so yummy. But if it's not grass-fed, then, really it's not so great to have a lot of beef. But if it's grass-fed beef, it's a great source of fat and iron and protein and so on and so forth. So we've got our steak here, and it's on the rack, and it's going to go into an oven that's been preheated for 225. We're going to use a special type of baking technique called reverse sear. And what's great about it is it's so easy to get that perfect medium rare inside temperature, which sometimes can be a bit of a challenge for people. You can do this with any type of steak, but I love to do it with a flank or skirt steak. So 225 for about a half an hour until the internal temperature reads about 125 degrees, which is pretty low. But then you take it out, and then we're going to sear it on a hot skillet. We're going to use a cast iron skillet for a minute or two on each side, and then it's perfect. You let it rest for about 10 minutes, and it's good to go. So we're going to get this in the oven, which is already preheated to 225. And we're going to put the timer on for 30 minutes, so we don't forget with all the other things we're doing this morning. And here it goes. And we'll come back in a few moments and show you the done dinner. Hi there, I'm Ayelet. We're back in the kitchen, and we are going to make a delicious gluten-free, paleo, keto-friendly dinner. And it's filled with lots of good fats and healthy protein and vegetables and just really clean food. So we got a couple of steps. We're going to make a sauté with some kale and some shiitake mushrooms. So we're going to get that started. We're going to I heated up a pan here on medium with some olive oil, and we're going to add in some shiitake mushrooms because that takes a few minutes to get that nice and soft. And we're just going to get those coated and put a little bit of salt on it to just start to draw out some of the moisture from the mushrooms. I'm using just a ceramic pan. You can use any type of skillet, a stainless steel skillet, but a lot of times I just use a cast iron for everything. So that's an option as well. So we're just going to let that kind of do its thing. And now I've got this cast iron here with a little bit of avocado oil in it because avocado oil has a higher heat point, and it's on really hot because we're going to sear our meat. Now, this is about a pound of flank steak that I marinated overnight, which we talked about. It has a little bit of the coconut aminos and honey and mustard and onion powder. So we cooked it at a low temperature, remember, at 225 for about a half an hour until the internal temperature of it was about 125. And now we're going to take it and we're going to sear it on both sides for about a minute or two. And you want to hear that sizzle. So we're going to check our time here. Let's see here. We're going to do our timer. So we're going to do 1 minute. It's a very thin steak, and then we're going to flip it over. And we're just going to give our mushrooms a little bit of a toss. We want to get them nice and cooked. And then also we're going to make a mashed sweet potato, and I actually did the prep on this. You'll see I added 2 different types of sweet potato into the pot. I used a pink flesh and a white flesh sweet potato that are a little bit different in flavor. The pink is a little bit sweeter and a little bit softer, and the white is a little bit more dense and a little bit less sweet. Now we're going to flip the steak. Should have a nice char on it. And we're going to flip it to the other side for about a minute, and then it should be good to go. With the reverse sear technique, it's really easy. I'm going to turn the fan on. Sorry for the noise, listeners. But the reverse sear is really easy to get that perfectly cooked meat, and it's really juicy, and all the juices get absorbed. So when it's done, we're going to put it back on here. Take this away.
When you serve it, do you slice it?
I do.
Yeah, like on an egg. Yeah.
We're going to slice it on the bias so that it's easier to chew, because with flank and skirt steak with a striation, it can be a little bit difficult to chew if you cut it lengthwise. So first of all, this is going to be very hot, so we're going to move that off burner, and we're going to turn that burner off. And then let's just check our mushrooms that are starting to get a little bit more oil in there. With ceramic pans, it's going to be a little different than a cast iron because it doesn't absorb much of the oils. But it's somewhat of a low temperature, medium to low, so it's okay to use olive oil because it's not going to burn. But we do want to get these mushrooms softened before we add the greens. So we're just going to cover it to help with that. And then when you cook a meat, it's good to let it rest for about 10 minutes to let all the juices get absorbed. But when I do cut it, you'll see that the striations are this way. So if I were to cut it this way, it would be really hard to chew. So it's better to cut it on the bias, which means perpendicular to the kind of muscular line. So we're going to cut it this way, and we'll have strips. And then, of course, we can cut it in half so they don't have to be as long. But that way it's much easier to chew. It is just delicious. Now normally I put tin foil over it and just let it sit for about 10 minutes. So we're just going to move this aside for now so we have some cooking room. So I'll put that here and let it sit while we're cooking the rest of this. Now the mashed potatoes we're going to make while this is cooking. So we're going to take our pot here. Now to save an extra bowl, you can do the mashing right in here, but we're going to add the extra ingredients. So we're going to add in some salt, which is always great to bring out the robust flavor. So we're going to do about a teaspoon of salt. I should say I put a bunch of salt in the water too when it was boiling, so it should help bring a little bit more flavor in also. And then we're going to add some cracked pepper, give it some flavor, and then we're going to add in about 2 to 4 tablespoons. This is only 2 sweet potatoes. At home I usually do a little bit more, and I'll do a larger pot, so I'm not needing as much. And then I'm going to get my potato masher, which is a little bit easier than just trying to do it with a spatula. And I boiled these so that they were really soft, almost coming apart in the water, so it makes it easier to mash. And you can see how it's just really taking in all of the oil. Take a quick break to stir the mushrooms and see where they're at. They're looking great. So they're almost at a point where I can add in the kale, but we're just going to give it a little bit longer. Now, what's a nice also added thing, you can always add in some onions to the mushrooms and flavor it in different ways. Today we're going to do a little bit of a lemon to it. don't need a lot of flavor or a lot of added flavor to it, but sometimes I'll put in even like a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar. There's some really great flavored balsamic vinegars you can do. So just think about sort of the flavor profile that you want. So this is nice and mashed with a masher. So we're going to take that out and then just go on to a spoon.
Now, if you wanted to, you could put butter in there instead of olive
You
oil
could.
too,
You could
right?
do butter. You could do ghee. You could do avocado oil. You could do anything.
Yeah.
We typically use olive oil. I was saying before,
Yeah.
I hail from Israel.
Yeah.
So olive oil is in everything, but you can totally use any sort of fat to make this be a fattier dish.
Yeah.
But what I love about this, you can see that speckled color because you have the different colored
Yeah.
flesh. There's also sweet potatoes that have purple flesh. They're much more dense when you cook them, so they have a little bit of a off-putting texture when you do a mash with them. But what's nice about this is if you have the steak in the oven at a temperature that's not ideal for roasting, then you're doing the starch on the stove, and it just makes it easier and quicker. All right, so this is good to go. We're going to let this sit for the moment, and we're going to check the mushrooms, and it should be ready to add the kale in. So we've got our kale already washed and chopped and dried. Beautiful kale, and we're just going to add it in. You can smell the fragrance of the shiitake mushrooms. Now kale is going to wilt to a much smaller size, so it won't take long for this to be able to be stirred. But we're going to add a little bit of salt. Sea salt is always what I use in the kitchen. And we're going to add some cracked pepper and some more olive oil. And again, you can use avocado oil. You can use butter if you want. It's a little bit greasier when you're doing this sort of a dish with a kale. So just mix it in a little bit, and then we're going to just let it cook a little bit. All right. And then we're going to go back to our steak here, and we're going to cut it. And let's see, I think I'm going to cut it in half first. So you can see how beautiful it is. So easy to do this. So then we're going to cut it into thin slices. Now the reason why you let it rest is because if you cut it right away, you're going to get all the juices that are going to drain out, and then the meat will be much tougher. But if you let it rest for 10 minutes, the juices get absorbed into the meat, and then when you cut it, you have a much juicier, tender piece of meat. Now you can see we chose to leave the fat on because it's just grass-fed meat and the fat has such great value to it. But if it's something that you don't love, then you can always trim the fat. It's not a ton on here, but you have a nice little char on here too. We were talking about you could also sear it on the grill. If you have a grill, I love to use a cast iron. You can use a stainless steel skillet. You can do anything.
It smells amazing. I know.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
like,
that's
I'm way
also
over
the
here.
marinade, right? So we're good there.
Somebody's licking their lips over there.
Yeah, they are.
We all are.
No, so we got our kale and our mushrooms. We're just going to finish it off with a little bit of lemon juice, but you can also do things like balsamic vinegar, as I spoke about. We have there's a pomegranate molasses that I love to use. Some of them have added sugar, but you can also find ones that don't have any added sugar to them. And it's a nice little added flavor profile. But we're getting some nice sweetness from the sweet potatoes, so we don't necessarily need to add. There's a little bit of sweetness in the steak, so it's nice to have something a little bit more acidic. Oh, look at that beautiful kale. It's so rich and vibrant in color, and the shiitakes give it a nice earthy kind of fragrance. So that is looking great. We'll give it another minute while we start to plate, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so we're going to have lots to pick from. There, and then we'll get some mashed sweet potatoes that are so beautiful. And we'll get our greens, and keep in mind as far as the fat, there's a ton of olive oil in everything. And again, you can substitute that oil with something else. if olives are not to your flavor profile or you have a sensitivity to it. But this looks fabulous. So I'm going to take this off the grill and turn it off. And then we're going to add a little bit of splash of lemon. Let's get it in here first to make sure we don't get seeds in there. And get the seeds out. Any way that you can. And then we'll pour a little bit of fresh lemon juice in. Mix it up. Oh, that color is just... I tell people, you know, outside of chocolate, kale is definitely my Godiva. When it comes to vegetables, I could eat a ton of it. It is definitely, some people it's sort of an acquired taste, but fine when
It's
you
like
cook
Brussels
it.
sprouts, I think.
I was
love
never
Brussels sprouts.
forced to eat Brussels sprouts
Yeah,
as
I
a kid.
was.
It's not an Israeli food,
Yeah.
so I ate it as an adult where it's roasted and a little charred.
Yeah, you got
and
the
it's,
best.
I like that. I never had to have the frozen, like,
Yeah.
Brussels sprouts.
It's a wonder I ever tried them again.
Yeah, it's seriously. I don't know how these Americans did it. All right, so, although of course we had the whole liver, you know, thing
Yeah,
as
that's
a kid.
true.
I don't know about the others, but okay, get a little more shiitakes in there. And we got a beautiful, beautiful plate. Let's move our steak out of the way. And we got a delicious meal that we are going to be trying. Who wants to be the first tester? I'm going to get a knife going here. You want to try it,
Closest,
Frank?
so-
There you
Yeah.
go. Or this was your
That was mine. I'll do it now.
clean one.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's cut into this.
Yeah.
Get a good
Nice
piece.
and tender.
Good taste. It's great.
Nice flavor.
Beautiful
A little
flavor.
bit of char.
Right there.
Good cut of grass-fed meat. You got your sweet potatoes and your kale. Give it a try as well. Nice and yummy.
Yeah, that is excellent.
Try some of the
A
other
little bit of a
stuff
smoky
here.
flavor to it.
Yeah,
it's good.
that's the searing, which is
Yeah,
so
that's
fun.
what it is.
And I'm always that perfect bite person, so we got to get a little
I
bit of
love that
everything.
you're putting it all together.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Absolutely, that's the whole
All
point,
goes
right?
together, right?
Nice sweet potato on there.
That's excellent.
So yummy.
Right, there's the sweet potato.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just the perfect acidity from the lemon and the sweetness from the sweet potato and that hardiness from the shiitakes and the meat. It's
Yep.
delicious meal. So nice and simple. You can definitely substitute the greens. You can add in some onions to the saute. You can mix up the different types of variety of root vegetables. You can do cauliflower mash and add it in, or parsnips. You can do a different type of meat.
The
But
kale
it-
is, I am not a kale person. I'm afraid of it. And
Like Brussels.
I have to try it. I have to try
But
it.
that's fantastic. I would absolutely
Nice
make
and
that.
simple.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you can
Yep.
also even do, you know, I said instead of the lemon, you could do a little bit of pomegranate molasses or a little bit of balsamic, or you can add in a little bit of coconut aminos with some sesame seeds to give it a bit of more of an Asian flavor. There's a lot of ways to do it. But
Yeah,
it's
a little
really,
hint of lemon's good.
Yeah.
yeah,
that's-
it's a
that
nice, simple meal.
cuts it a little
And
bit.
I mean, this would take an hour to make, really. So that's easy to have a fresh homemade meal in an hour, even if you're working a long day. Just
Really
prep some
tasty.
stuff in advance. So
Right.
that's dinner.